Life Stories brings you another heartfelt journey of love, sacrifice, and resilience. In today's story, we follow Brian, a devoted brother who gave up everything to support his younger sister, Emily, after a devastating family tragedy. Through trials and triumphs, their unbreakable bond carried them to a brighter future. But as Emily's wedding approaches, Brian faces judgment, humiliation, and unexpected challenges from her in-laws. How will he navigate this storm while staying true to his values? Subscribe to Life Stories to join us on this emotional journey and discover the power of family, perseverance, and standing up for what's right. Let's begin today's story. The warmth of the early morning sun was something I used to take for granted. But after the fire that took our parents and everything we knew, I began to see the world differently. My name is Brian, and the story I'm about to share is one of sacrifice, perseverance, and love. It's a story of what it means to be family and how the weight of responsibility can forge the deepest bonds. I was just 15 when our lives were turned upside down. It happened on a cold November night. Emily, my little sister, was 9 years old at the time. We'd fallen asleep in our cozy 2-story home in Connecticut, unaware that our lives would change forever by morning. I woke up coughing, the acrid smell of smoke filling my lungs. Through the haze and the panic, I grabbed Emily, and we barely made it out. But our parents didn't. The next few weeks were a blur. Funeral arrangements, legal formalities, and the realization that we were now orphans sank in slowly, painfully. We stayed with my dad's best friend, John, for a while. But I could see how much of a strain it was for him and his family. He told us we could stay until I finished high school. But I couldn't bear to rely on someone else for too long. I made the decision to leave school and start working. John tried to talk me out of it, and so did our social worker. But my mind was made up. Emily needed stability, and I wasn't going to let her suffer more than she already had. Our parents had left behind some savings and insurance money, enough to cover our expenses for a short while. But I knew it wouldn't last forever. At 16, I entered a world I wasn't prepared for, a world of long hours, bills, and constant worry. But I promised myself one thing: no matter how hard it got, Emily wouldn't feel the weight of it. Emily was a bright, curious child who always had her nose buried in books. She loved school, and her teachers adored her. At first, she didn't understand why I stopped going to school. She thought maybe I was taking a break. But when she found out the truth, her face crumpled. "Brian, is it really okay for me to go to school when you're working so hard?" she asked one night, her voice trembling. "Emily," I said, kneeling in front of her and holding her hands. "That's why I'm working. So you can grow up, study, and chase your dreams. That's my job as your big brother." "But you're sacrificing everything," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "It's not a sacrifice," I replied, trying to hold back my own tears. "It's what family does. One day, you'll do amazing things, and I'll be the proudest brother in the world. That's all I want." From that moment, Emily became even more determined. She threw herself into her studies, always aiming to make me proud. She was a straight-A student, constantly topping her class. But despite her achievements, I could see the guilt in her eyes every time I came home tired from work. When it came time for her to graduate from high school, she shocked me by announcing she didn't want to go to college. "I've decided to get a job," she said during a meeting with her teacher, Mr. Thompson. I was stunned. "What? Why?" "Because I don't want to burden you anymore," she said, looking down at her hands. Mr. Thompson, who had been silently watching us, finally spoke up. "Emily, with your grades, you could get into any university, even with scholarships. This is an opportunity you can't pass up." I nodded in agreement. "He's right. Don't worry about the money. I'll figure it out." "But Brian." "No buts," I interrupted, trying to keep my voice firm. You're going to college. End of discussion. It took a lot of convincing. But eventually, Emily agreed. She set her sights on one of the top law schools in the country, determined to make the most of the opportunity. Watching her walk across the stage at her high school graduation was one of the proudest moments of my life. Emily's journey through college wasn't easy. The program was grueling, and the expectations were sky high. But she thrived. Just like I knew she would. She graduated with honors and passed the bar exam on her first try. By the time she was 26, she was already a successful corporate lawyer at a prestigious firm. I used to joke with her that she was the star of the family while I was the supporting cast. But in truth, I couldn't have been prouder of her. She had taken the chances I never had and turned them into something incredible. What I didn't know at the time was that Emily's success was driven by more than just ambition. Years later, she told me that watching me struggle with legal paperwork after our parents passed away had left a lasting impact on her. I felt so helpless, she said one evening over dinner. I didn't understand any of it. And I hated that I couldn't help you. That's why I became a lawyer. I wanted to be someone who could make a difference. Hearing those words brought tears to my eyes. It was then that I realized our struggles hadn't just shaped me, they had shaped Emily too. In the years that followed, I watched as Emily built a life for herself. She fell in love with David, a brilliant surgeon, and their relationship seemed like something out of a fairy tale. When they announced their engagement, I couldn't have been happier for her. Little did I know, the journey ahead would test us in ways I never expected. But for now, as I prepared to walk Emily down the aisle, I allowed myself to feel proud of everything we had overcome together. The drive to David's family home for the pre-wedding introductions felt heavier than it should have. I'd met David a handful of times, and I liked him well enough. He was polite, respectful, and most importantly, he clearly loved Emily. But meeting his family was a different matter. Emily had warned me that they came from a wealthy, highly educated background, and while she hadn't said it outright, I could sense her concern about how I might be perceived. I wasn't nervous, though. I wasn't ashamed of my life or my choices. Still, when I pulled up to their grand estate just outside of Boston, I couldn't help but feel a pang of discomfort. The house was enormous, the kind of place you'd expect to see in a magazine spread. As I stepped out of the car, I adjusted my tie and took a deep breath. The introductions started off well enough. David's parents, Dr. Keith Carter and his wife, Helen, greeted us with polite smiles. Keith was a tall man in his 60s with a commanding presence. Helen, impeccably dressed, exuded the kind of cold charm that only came with years of social refinement. "We've heard so much about you from David," Helen said as we sat down in their sunlit living room. "It must have been challenging, raising Emily after your parents passed," Keith added. His tone was pleasant, but there was something about the way he said it that made me uneasy. "It was a challenge," I replied honestly, "but Emily's always been bright and determined. She made it easy to be proud of her." As we talked, I noticed subtle shifts in their expressions. They were smiling, but their eyes betrayed a quiet judgment. And then Keith asked the question I'd been dreading. "So, Brian, what do you do for a living?" "I work at a medical equipment company," I said. "I handle sales and distribution." "Oh, and where did you go to school?" Helen asked, her voice light but probing. "I didn't attend college," I admitted. "I started working after high school." Their smiles froze, and the room seemed to grow colder. "You didn't graduate from college?" Helen repeated, her tone sharper now. "Actually, I didn't finish high school either," I said. Keeping my voice steady, I dropped out to take care of Emily after our parents passed. For a moment, there was silence. Then Keith leaned forward, his expression hardening. "So, you're saying you only have a middle school education?" "Yes," I replied, meeting his gaze. Keith and Helen exchanged a look, and I could feel the atmosphere shift. They didn't say anything outright, but their disapproval was palpable. As the conversation continued, it became clear that they weren't just concerned, they were appalled. To them, my lack of formal education was a stain on their family's reputation. When Emily and David stepped out briefly to review some wedding details, their polite facade crumbled completely. "This is unacceptable," Helen hissed. "Had we known, we would never have approved of this marriage." "I beg your pardon," I said, stunned. "Our family is highly respected," Keith added. "Every single member has attended prestigious universities. And now, our son is marrying someone with a middle school graduate for a brother? It's humiliating." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd faced judgment before, but never like this. "Let me make this clear," Keith continued, lowering his voice. "We'll announce that you and Emily are only nominally related. You're not her guardian. And you certainly didn't raise her. If you try to involve yourself in this family or approach us for money, we'll take legal action." Their cruelty left me speechless. I wanted to defend myself, to tell them that their wealth and degrees didn't make them better than me, but I bit my tongue. For Emily's sake, I couldn't afford to escalate things. When Emily and David returned, Keith and Helen immediately reverted to their warm, welcoming demeanor, as if nothing had happened. I played along, unwilling to let my anger ruin the moment. Driving home that evening, I replayed their words in my head, feeling a mix of shame and rage. But more than anything, I felt sadness. Sadness that Emily was marrying into a family that valued appearances over character. Little did I know, their behavior at the pre-wedding meeting was only the beginning. The day of Emily and David's wedding was supposed to be a celebration, a culmination of all the sacrifices, love, and effort that had brought us to this moment. As I stood outside the grand venue in Boston, I couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. Pride. Of course, Emily had come so far, but also apprehension. The encounter with David's parents still lingered in my mind, and I couldn't shake the sense that something wasn't right. Rachel, my fiancée and partner in business, was by my side. Her presence gave me strength. She'd been the one I confided in about the Carters' insults, and though she'd tried to convince me to confront them, I'd refused. "This is Emily's day," I had told her. "I won't do anything to ruin it." "Brian," Rachel said as we entered the venue, her voice soft but firm, "if they try anything today, you know I've got your back." I nodded, grateful for her support. The venue was breathtaking, crystal chandeliers, elegant floral arrangements, and a sea of well-dressed guests. Emily had worked hard to make this day perfect, and it showed. We found our seats in the section reserved for the bride's family. Rachel sat down first, and I looked for my name card beside hers. When I saw it, my stomach turned. Scrawled messily across the card in red marker were the words "middle school graduate loser." For a moment, I stood frozen. The humiliation was overwhelming. My heart pounded in my chest as I instinctively glanced toward the groom's family section. There they were, the Carters, smiling smugly, their laughter barely concealed. Helen even raised her champagne glass toward me, as if mocking me. "Unbelievable," Rachel muttered, her eyes narrowing as she read the card. "They actually did this." I clenched my fists, every instinct screaming at me to walk over and confront them. But I couldn't. "Not here. Not now. This was Emily's wedding. I'm leaving," I said quietly, turning to go. Rachel grabbed my arm. "No, you're not. You've held it together all this time for Emily and David. Don't let them win." Her words stopped me in my tracks. She was right. Leaving would only give the Carters more satisfaction. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to calm down. Ignoring the stares and whispers from the groom's relatives, I sat down beside Rachel. Soon, the wedding began. As Emily walked down the aisle, radiant in her white dress, my anger melted away. All I could think about was how proud I was of her. The ceremony was beautiful. And for a while, I allowed myself to enjoy it. But during the reception, another blow came. I was supposed to give a speech, a heartfelt tribute to Emily and the journey we'd been on together. I'd spent weeks preparing it, pouring my soul into every word. When the speeches began, I waited for my turn, but it never came. Confused, I approached one of the staff members to ask what had happened. "I'm so sorry," the staff member said hesitantly. "One of the groom's family members asked us to remove your speech from the schedule. They said it wasn't prepared." I didn't need to ask who had made the request. The Carters' smug expressions said it all. My anger reached a boiling point. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about respect for me, for Emily, for everything we'd been through. I stood up, ready to confront them. But Rachel stopped me again. "Let me handle this," she said, her voice icy with determination. She walked over to their table, her heels clicking against the floor like a countdown. I followed, staying a few steps behind. When we reached the Carters, Rachel didn't waste time. "Do you think this is funny?" she asked, her voice calm but sharp. "Excuse me?" Keith replied, feigning innocence. "The name card. Cancelling his speech. All of it. Do you really think this is acceptable behavior?" Keith smirked. "We're simply ensuring the day goes smoothly. Having an uneducated man speak at this event would have been embarrassing for everyone." I opened my mouth to respond, but Rachel held up a hand. "If you think education is the only measure of a person's worth, then you clearly don't know who you're dealing with. Brian isn't just anyone. He's the president of a company that supplies your clinic. And as of today, that relationship is over." The color drained from Keith's face. "You can't be serious." "Oh, I am," Rachel said coolly. "You've insulted the wrong person." For the first time, the Carters looked genuinely unsettled. But I didn't stay to watch their reaction. I returned to my seat, my heart still racing. The rest of the reception passed in a blur. But when I finally gave my speech, thanks to the staff arranging a last-minute slot, I spoke from the heart. As I looked out at the guests, I saw Emily and David smiling at me, their faces filled with gratitude. And for the first time that day, I felt a sense of peace. In the end, everything came full circle. Emily and David, with their newfound clarity, decided to cut ties with the toxic influence of his parents. Together, they built a life based on respect, love, and shared values. As for me, I found peace in knowing that the sacrifices I made helped shape the incredible woman Emily had become. Rachel and I grew closer, not just as partners in business but as soulmates who had each other's backs through life's trials. We're planning our wedding now, ready to take the next step in our journey together. Life isn't about titles or status, it's about the connections we build and the love we give. And if there's one lesson I've learned, it's that resilience and kindness will always triumph. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more heartfelt stories from Life Stories. See you in the next video.